All right, so we're going to talk about chapter 18 today, the renal function. Let's get started right away with just looking at the functions of the urinary system. So the urinary system, the kidneys, right? We're talking about the kidneys in particular. They are going to regulate your plasma ionic composition. So your nephron is going to be in charge of secreting and reabsorbing ions such as hydrogen ions, potassium ions, chlorine ions, bicarbonate, namely sodium, right? That's a really big ion. It's going to regulate plasma volume because the volume of your plasma has to do with the amount of fluid, right? The amount of water that you have in the bloodstream. And then water will go where solutes go. So because the kidneys have control over secreting or reabsorbing sodium, the water will follow the sodium. So if you are going to retain salt, the water will be retained in your body. If you excrete salt, then your water will follow the sodium. So that's how your kidneys can control plasma volume. Plasma osmolarity, right? The osmotic gradient, also due to ions. Plasma pH, because your kidneys have a role of either getting rid of hydrogen ions or it can retain hydrogen ions. And also there's bicarbonate. It can constantly produce the buffer that we have in the blood. And this is all basically going to be the next chapter, which is I think chapter 19. And the kidneys are going to obviously remove our metabolic wastes and anything that we are taking into our body that might be quote unquote foreign, like any drugs that you're taking, like antibiotics or, ibuprofen, substances like that. The other functions the kidney has, secondary functions, will be to secrete erythropoietin and renin. Erythropoietin, EPO, remember that was the hormone that is involved in increasing the red blood cell production. And then renin is not a hormone, although a lot of times it's called a hormone, but it's going to be involved in something called the RAS, renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, and that will be talked about next chapter 2. But renin is going to increase your blood pressure, okay? And then your kidneys activate vitamin D3 to the active form of vitamin D3, so which is called calcitriol. So this is your active vitamin D3. And then there's gluconeogenesis. So if you remember this is making glucose from scratch. So if you're starving, if your body needs glucose, your kidneys actually have this function along with your liver. All right, so I'll spend a little bit of time just going over, reviewing a little bit of anatomy, what's important to hear, to physiology. So this should be pretty self-explanatory. 2 kidneys, urine is formed in the kidneys, right? So we're forming our urine. It's going to be traveling through the ureter, stored in the bladder, and then out the body through the urethra. You guys need to remember the nephron. So this is going to be very important in chapter 19, that the nephron will have renal corpuscles in the cortex. And the corpuscles are going to be both the glomerulus, which is our fenestrated capillary. So glomerulus is fenestrated capillary. Remember, fenestrated means it has regular pores in it. And the Bowman's capsule is going to be a structure with a space in it that can capture the fluid that's coming out from the bloodstream, coming out from the glomerulus. That fluid, called filtrate, is going to move into the proximal convoluted tubule where much of reabsorption is taking place. So the proximal convoluted tubule is where we reabsorb most of the substances that our body wants back. That filtrate will then go down the loop of Henle, come back up the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. Keep in mind that loop of Henle is in the medulla of the kidney, and it has a very big role in, again, chapter 19, to help us concentrate our urine. And then there is the distal convoluted tubule where the filtrate moves through. Some more substances are reabsorbed here. And then we're going to move from the distal convoluted tubule to the collecting duct. So the collecting duct plays an important role again in concentrating our urine. We'll look at that in the next chapter. And remember, the collecting duct actually turns into the papillary duct at the end here. And then that papillary duct is where the urine is done. So there's no more modification here. Now we have urine, and the urine is going to be released into the minor calyx, to the major calyx, to the pelvis, and then out the ureter. Remember that there are two kinds of nephrons in the kidney, that there's a shorter, more compact nephron that's higher up in the cortex, and that's called a cortical nephron. And then there's a second kind of nephron, which is a lot longer. It dips deep into the medulla, and it's called the juxtamedullary nephron. And just keep that in mind. We're going to, again, talk about this in the next chapter. The juxtaglomerular apparatus, which is a tongue twister, remember that that is a collection of cells at the junction between the distal tubule and the Bowman's capsule, and it's going to contain a couple of cells that are of interest to us. So the macula densa, we'll be talking about the macula densa cells. The macula densa cells are inside of our afferent arteriole, and they're going to have a role in controlling the flow of blood into the glomerulus. And then we have these granular cells, which are also called juxtaglomerular cells, that will play a role in physiology. Let's just take a look at the blood supply for a second. So when the blood comes into the kidney, it comes in through the afferent arteriole. Remember, how arterioles are going to be the major blood vessel to constrict or dilate to control resistance and therefore control blood flow. So the afferent arteriole goes into the glomerulus, and then the efferent arteriole, E for exit, leaves. Okay, the blood leaves the glomerulus. And you can modify how fast blood is coming into the glomerulus by constricting or dilating these blood vessels. Another thing to notice and to remember is that the peritubular capillaries are capillaries that the efferent arterioles become. The efferent arterioles will become this network of peritubular capillaries. They're going to surround the tubules, right, which is the nephron, and they're going to be there to pick up anything that the nephron is going to reabsorb. So the filtrate that's running through the ducts here, right, the filtrate that's moving through, if there's anything that your body wants back, that wants to be removed from the filtrate and put into the bloodstream, it's going to enter into the peritubular capillaries. Now, I want to point out one very special set of peritubular capillaries called the vasa recta. The vasa recta is going to be found on these long juxtamedullary nephrons, and they are going to play an important role in taking back water and concentrating our urine, again, in the next chapters. The next chapter's got a lot of nitty-gritty material, but I want to bring up, that notice the vasa recta is another set of capillaries that's going to follow the loop of Henle, and it's going to be intimately involved in taking substances away from the loop of Henle and, secreting water, or picking up water from the loop of Henle as well. Okay. So some terminology before we move on to other topics. When your fluid from the blood, which is plasma, leaves the glomerulus and enters into the Bowman's capsule, this is called filtration. So the fluid that we have inside the Bowman's capsule and that's moving through the tubules is called filtrate. Okay, so this is filtration. Not everything is filtered because some items are too big, right, to move through the filtration membrane. Let's look at the filtration membrane for just a quick second. Remember that the glomerulus is covered by podocytes, and podocytes are going to limit what leaves the glomerulus. You're also going to have these barriers, which is if you are a very small molecule inside the plasma, you're going to have the fenestrations of the capillary itself be a barrier, right? So they're quite big, but it's going to limit very large proteins to come out. So albumin, for example, your clotting factors, for example, you're not losing those in your urine because those are too big to move through the fenestrated capillary. It might move through there, but then it's going to hit a second barrier, which is the basement membrane. It can hurt a third barrier, the epithelial cells of the podocyte, right? So that's your filtration membrane. So things that are able to leave and exit and move through all three of these barriers will be filtered. So now that we have this filtrate, if your body wants it back, it can reabsorb it. So the word reabsorb is to put something from the filtrate back into the bloodstream. And the word secretion is items can actually move from the blood into the tubules directly. So that's secretion. And then excretion is going to be just from the tubules out the body. So this excretion is actually not a particular function. It's just what happens with the waste, that it gets excreted, it leaves the body. But filtration and reabsorption and secretion, those are all major functions of the nephron.